Batya, what's on your radar?
So the New York Times reported last week that the Biden administration may reinstate the practice of detaining migrant families that cross the border illegally. The irony is not lost on those who recall that as a candidate, Biden blasted the same policy as inhumane and racist. Quote, "It is a moral failing and a national shame when children are locked away in overcrowded detention centers," Biden's campaign website still proclaims. "The next president will need to take urgent action to end the Trump administration's draconian policies grounded in fear and racism," candidate Biden went on. "Trump has waged an unrelenting assault on our values and our history as a nation of immigrants. It is wrong, and it stops when Joe Biden is elected president." Well, it did stop when Joe Biden was elected president, at least for a while. In December of 2021, the administration put an end to the detention of migrant families and released over 100 families into the U.S. 2 years and 2 million illegal immigrants later, President Biden is considering reversing course. Has his administration succumbed to the fear and racism that it once denounced? More likely, they are reading the polls and realizing that the border crisis is going to be a massive vulnerability for Biden come 2024, and not just with Republicans and independents. When asked if there is an, quote, invasion at the southern border in August, a majority of Americans said yes, including 42% of Democrats. A new Gallup poll found that American satisfaction with the immigration situation is lower than at any point in the last decade, which, as you may recall, includes all 4 years Trump was president. That same poll found that 1/5 of Democrats want less immigration, up from a paltry 2% in 2021. And most voters blame Biden for the crisis at the border, Rasmussen found. No wonder Biden is doing a Trump-like about-face. Of course, the White House rejects any comparison with President Trump's border policies. As usual, when their political rivals do something, it's white supremacy. But when they do the very same thing, it's merely, quote, safe, orderly, and humane, as a DHS spokesperson put it to the Times. It's just the latest example of how blatantly cynical the left's deployment of outrage over alleged racism is. Yet another example of how quickly such smears are used to distract from the fact that many liberal pieties are in truth relatively obvious disguises for upper middle class economic interests. Though they like to speak about immigration in moral terms, the Democratic Party's preference for looser immigration laws is, in part, a rational expression of the self-interest of its metropolitan elite voters and donors, who benefit directly from the endless supply of cheap restaurant cooks, delivery drivers, house cleaners, nannies, and landscapers. As Nancy Pelosi infamously put it in reference to the millions crossing the border illegally, we need them to pick the crops. Meanwhile, the American working class pays for it with the erasure of any meaningful wage floor. It is how safe your industry is from recently arrived workers willing to accept far lower wages that determines how pro-immigrant you can afford to be, rather than any deeper claim to openness, generosity, or virtue. Still, it takes a particular form of chutzpah to call your political opponents racists for attempting to protect American workers from wage-suppressing competition with imported cheap labor, only to revert back to those same policies once your accusation helped net you the presidency. It's not just family detention that Biden has adopted from Trump. Biden did away with Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, which requires asylum seekers to await their court date on the other side of the border, only to announce plans to reinstate it earlier this month. His administration initially tried its best to do away with Title 42, a pandemic-era policy allowing the quick deportation of those who cross illegally, only to expand it when the courts objected. Now a federal judge is ordering border officials to stop using Title 42, which is what sent Biden's team on a fishing expedition into Trump's playbook, looking for ways to staunch the tsunami of migrants Biden's policies encouraged to come. The Biden administration has proven an excellent business partner for the cartels that run the lucrative human smuggling operations conveying migrants across the border. During a period of labor shortages that were leading to rising labor militancy, what big business needed was a jobs program that would undercut further potential worker gains. The cartels complied, supplying laborers to the tune of 2 million souls. And this includes 250,000 children. many of whom are employed in dangerous jobs where they toil to earn enough to pay back debts to the cartels. A recent New York Times expose found migrant children doing work for J. Crew, Walmart, Target, Ben & Jerry's, and Fruit of the Loom. They are working in slaughterhouses and as roofers, among the other dangerous jobs that the U.S. long ago deemed not suitable for children. 60 caseworkers estimated that 2/3 of all unaccompanied migrant children end up working full-time. That's 2/3 of 250,000. What is the word for when you smear someone as a white supremacist to win a contest and then unofficially partner with a brutal enemy to undercut your own workers with child labor? What do you call it when every legacy media outlet and Democratic politician rallied to the chorus denouncing President Trump's family separation policy as uniquely evil, only to have those same outlets and politicians ignore what it was preventing? The deployment of children as de facto slaves, often by family members who had been entrusted to protect them. What redress does a person and his supporters have when they were smeared as racists and xenophobes, only to have the people who smeared them ignore the far worse fate it has imposed on the most vulnerable and then embrace the very tactics they called racist when it proved politically expedient? Of course, there has been some backlash from immigrant advocates and Democratic lawmakers who are upset to see Biden reverse course on family detention. But, it's the kind of polite backlash that they reserve for their own. Most liberal news outlets are silent on the matter. There are no hysterical headlines about racism and white supremacy, even from the few outlets reporting on this, like the Times. Trump's immigration policies may have seemed cruel at the time, but as it turns out, they were actually preventing even more immeasurable cruelty, the kind that liberal compassion seems adept at engendering and keeping in the shadows. For Trump, of course, border security was never about race, as the many border-dwelling Hispanic voters who turned out for him in 2020 recognized. It was about countermanding the attempt to erase the distinction between citizen and non-citizen and reasserting the nation's basic obligation to look out for the interests of its own citizens. Maybe now that President Biden is running Trump's playbook on immigration, the charade that casts the material interests of a college-educated upper quintile as a struggle for civil rights will finally come to an end. So, Robbie, I don't know if you saw that New York Times expose about the child laborers. Absolutely appalling and horrifying, and just really, really should force a reckoning over how Trump and immigration were covered. I can't. I'm still haunted by it. I can't stop thinking about that report. Yes, which is what led to this.
And I agree with you that, the media is going very soft on Biden, actually for some continuity in immigration policies, as you point out, that when it was outrageous when Trump did it, why is it not outrageous when Biden does it? But I would say, and you maybe disagree with this, I would say that the easiest way to actually combat the surge of migrants coming here in unsafe conditions that leave them in debt to the cartel would be to make it easier to immigrate here legally and sidestep this horrific process, and then we have no control over it, people rushing over the border, and just make it so that people can come here, work, can do legal work here, and can grow our economy and contribute to the lowering of prices for food and goods and services and everything, because we're not all, we all benefit from things being cheap. Like right now we're in the grips of this inflation crisis where everything costs way too much, in part because we have artificially restricted the labor supply, labor being just one resource like anything else. It'd be like if we arbitrarily restricted the meat supply or the fruit and veggie supply or the supply of hammers and nails or the supply of electricity or anything else.
Yeah, I really don't agree with that. I mean, because inflation comes from too much money pursuing too few goods, right? If you import, 2 million people and immediately they all find jobs, right? That's going to be even more money pursuing fewer and fewer goods. And of course, we know that the number one good that secures a middle class life, the number one most important thing is a house, right? Every single one of those people needs somewhere to live. We're in a housing crisis. And, Robbie, I'm sure you would agree with this. You can't have a sort of open border if you have any form of welfare, right? Because then tax paying citizens end up paying, benefits for people who are not citizens. So that was something I think even Milton Friedman, your hero, probably, at some level, you would acknowledge. And, we're not going to do away with, our the basic benefits, protections for the poor. So, at least even I feel libertarians should be able to acknowledge that until we have some sort of entitlement reform, the situation
I would get rid of the welfare, not the immigration. But
right.
the housing is a good, people can't, it's very hard to build houses. You can't get a construction crew together to do it because those people disproportionately used to comprise immigrants. And there's actually a shortage. We can't build things in this country because we put so many restrictions on the ability to do that, including on the labor supply.
I think this is something we would agree on. I think the real cause of the housing shortage is in a lot of liberal cities, which is where it's most necessary. There are just the laws in place. I hear this from developers. There are laws in place. The laws right now in place so favor tenants over landlords that there is sort of a hesitancy to invest in this industry right now because people are extremely worried about, what that means down the line. So I feel like that's even somewhere that we could, agree on, that the left has sort of, there's nothing they hate more than small business owners, people who have managed to cobble together some kind of autonomy independent of their institutions. We should probably leave it at that, though. Thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate it.
We'll have more Rising right after this. Thank you, Batya.